But did this fight card expose larger issues with the UFC that a lot of us have been pointing out, to maybe sometimes to pissing off the hardcore fans? Luke, we're talking about, does Dana White have a star problem? And do you add to that the idea of too many boring champions? Even though I just said I wasn't bored by Ankalaev's performance, a lot of people are going to lump him into that category. So, Luke, the idea of UFC lacking top-end marketable stars is not a new discussion. We've been through that a lot. It's probably a byproduct of their content provider mentality that they're riding these days. But considering the most exciting fighter and active champion in the sport just lost his title to a wrestler named Magomed, is it fair to say that UFC is in fact lacking mightily in mainstream stars at the moment, and that the promotion does have too many boring champions, which I hate saying that word, but is it true right now in totality? Do we have, if that's a bad thing, too many foreign guys that only wrestle? Is that where we're at right now? Did this expose that?
Well, let's go through. Let's answer. All right. So I think there are two ways that you have to answer the question. One is, are they popular? That's one. And then two, do they have an action-oriented style? Because you can either be both or one or the other or none of them, right? Think about that. All right. Pantoja clearly has an action-oriented style, but is basically unknown to anybody but the hardcore fans.
Sure.
So there you go. Then you got Merab. Merab has something of an action-oriented style, but is definitely not a finisher, and I think has a stalling problem, and I think certainly is an extremely good fighter, but is not a beloved fighter at the box office. I don't think that
it may not be.
Right. 145, it had Topuria, and now we're back to Volk and Diego Lopez. I don't know how to answer that question because I don't really know what's going to happen there. But certainly losing him at 45 is not great for 45. I think we can all agree there. 55, I think there's plenty of good things at 55. And Islam Makhachev, people say he's not really popular. I don't believe that. I do think he's actually pretty popular. Yeah, exactly. And also, he's the pound-for-pound best guy in the sport. He's fucking awesome.
And he got the Habib rub. He's more powerful as a pay-per-view brand than people will really let on, to be fair. You know? So
we've got Pantoja as a bit of an issue. You've got Merab as a bit of an issue. At 45, it's neither here nor there at the moment. 55, not at all a problem, I don't think. 70, you've got Bilal.
And Shavkat, who we love, but isn't not like a household
Okay, but I'm
name.
talking about just champions at the moment.
Okay.
Bilal. Again, I have a lot of respect for Bilal's game. I also should note the UFC did the right thing and put the Palestine flag in his online profile, which I think is a great thing. I applaud the organization for that. But we're just talking about, is he exciting for the fans? Fans don't seem to feel that way. And is he a box office draw? Certainly not. Then you go to 85. Different story. And by the way, if they get Hamzat, you're in a very different story. So I don't think that necessarily qualifies. 205.
And DDP's coming on. He's coming on right
now. Yeah, exactly. But 205, again, if Pereira gets back there, different conversation. But right now, Ankalaev, good fighter, definitely not a box office draw. And then at heavyweight, I don't know what the fuck to say about heavyweight.
The two guys.
One of the worst divisions. Let's go to the women's side. So at strawweight, you got Zhang Weili, who I think certainly is well liked. I don't know how popular she is, but definitely action-oriented, well-liked fighter by the fan base.
They claim, social media-wise, that her metrics are through the roof because of the Chinese connection.
So maybe a slightly different conversation with her. Then you've got Valentina Shevchenko. I don't think she's quite as exciting as her reputation comes out, and I don't think she's a big box office draw either.
She's hit her ceiling
but
a while ago.
Generally is well-respected within the fan base. 35, I don't even know what... I mean, Kayla Harrison might get that belt, but Pena, I don't even know what to say about that division. The answer is there is certainly something to the argument that they've got a cadre of champions who in many cases are not popular, but good. In other cases are not popular. And, I don't know what to say about the Peñas and so forth of the world. It's not to say that it has affected every part of the championship portfolio, BC. But it is fair to say, is there something to the idea that the UFC, because of its internationalization and the way the MMA metagame has gone, that you've just got a lot of these guys now who have taken over who aren't necessarily making the same kinds of fan connections,
no doubt,
box office draws, even if they are so good, they can win titles. It's a real issue. How big you want to say is certainly up for some debate, but I don't think it's a non-existent issue.
No, and I think the problem is that it's getting worse, and the problem is that even though we needed this fight to happen, we were criticizing the UFC for not making this fight a year ago when it probably should have. You have to, meritocracy-wise, you have to put people in there, your stars in the toughest matchups, and do what they do. They did it, okay? The title changed. It's not about Ankalaev here. But is there a star problem? Yes. Is there an aging group of stars, the Holloways, McGregors, Poiriers, like on and on, that are going to be out soon? And is there a proper backlog of people ready to replace? No. And you could say, well, you can't just manufacture stars like a microwave, and you can't. No. But I think you're starting to see the things that we've warned or said, I don't like this trend, and people like BC, just enjoy it. Shut up. This is our MMA. This is our weekend getaway. We don't want to hear you complaining. And that is true. But it's only true up to a certain point. Because I think the trends are, this is starting to feel like a soulless product. It's hard to make stars when it feels like a assembly line Walmart product of plug and place. When we're at the point where, like, what's the thing that got you into this game and kept you here, whether it was boxing or MMA or however, pro wrestling, however you started it. It's fighters and their stories, fights and their stories. When was the last time a UFC fight had you feeling, 4 months in advance, counting down the days? When was the last time we have like true rivalries or personal stories pushed to the forefront? I think this is really a clear vision of what happens when you become all about extracting as much money from the industry as you possibly can, spreading out and having as many tentacles and have a show every weekend as you possibly can, and becoming this kind of soulless factory with the Dana White Contender Series, and nobody on these cards have Wikipedia pages, and the next assembly line of young stars come in, they go 1-3 and they're out of the organization. Let's bring in the next group. That it's always about the 3 letters UFC, Dana's face, the connection to the creators and politicians that they have, and the whole vibe of being a UFC fan. But that's not retaining the old hardcores, and I think it's creating very short window fans who get into it for everybody who's 20-something and white right now and male is into UFC, and they've marketed it to them aggressively. But they're not doing what they used to do in spending the money or putting the focus to make you care about these individuals. They had a guy in Ngannou who had the greatest story personal of anyone that they've ever had in their organization, and look what's going on with that. They can't even make the fights under the hood right now. So if you want to talk about TKO boxing and where will it fit in, and Dana claiming all these things he's going to change, let's look at where the UFC actually is right now. It's not Ankalaev's fault. It's not really just about that. It's about the bigger picture to me, Luke. Is there something to this, or am I just getting so bitter? Where's the stories and storylines? When someone gets a breakthrough win, they don't go to Bristol, Connecticut and the ESPN car wash and on 8 hours of TV anymore. They're not doing that type of stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, hold on.
We had a press conference over the weekend, but it was about exploiting Bryce Mitchell's racism of come see him and you can pay to throw the ball and he'll get dunked in the water. That's what it felt like. Like this, like
the UFC has turned into the D-Real tweet. Drill or D-Real. Where it's like they're turning the racism meter up, looking back at the audience and smiling to see when they stop laughing. But let's pull in.
You can even take race out of it, or even take some of the toxic culture
It's a joke. I mean, they're cashing in on the controversy from these guys having opinions from 1925. Okay, Long Island Luke. But let me try something here. Long Island Luke. This is a hobby horse of BC's. It's not like I disagree with him, but I'm not as motivated by it in the same way as he is. So let me ask you, and I'm trying to ask this in good faith. So go with me here. How much of this is BC's issue? How much of this is a product more generally issue from your vantage point? And if you disagree with BC, please, by all means, say so.
Yeah, I don't think it's as big of an issue as we're making it out to be. Like, obviously, we don't have a McGregor, a Rousey, anything like that anymore, but we still have plenty of stars. They're not.
Do you feel like they're trying to make stars, or they're trying to? That's the real question. Or
I mean, yes and no, dude. We just saw Rufy get in his 3rd UFC fight, get the opening bout on a pay-per-view, and he showed the hell out, man. Like, he could be a future star. John Silva, another guy from that camp, obviously looks like a future star. Like, I could see them marketing these
When you
guys
say
in
star, so when we say star, we mean people that draw big numbers on pay-per-view. That's what we mean.
And people that become household names in regular sports homes that watch football and golf.
Hoofy and Jayon Silva are not pulling pay-per-view numbers.
Sure. Yet.
Yeah,
they might.
That's
be.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So you're building star. I mean, you're building Paddy Pimblett. Is he gonna sell all these pay-per-views? Maybe.
He might.
They're building him, right?
Yeah, Paddy. They might. Shavkat, though, I don't know how that's gonna go. You know what I mean? Like Shavkat might be a world beater, but I don't know how that's gonna go.
I think he's gonna be like Pantoja, where he's always in fun fights, but his pay-per-views don't do that great.
Yeah. Okay. And then you've got Hamzat, who's coming up. 205. I don't know.
Well, I think it plays
past Poetan
into,
and Ankalaev. I don't know who that would be.
When a card comes out, and then BC's going to complain. Here we go. How bad is it, BC? And I'll sometimes give you answers, and then people will be like, see, that's so much of a casual BC. Is he trying to get these extra casual names added in? Isn't that part of what we loved and fell in love with the sport? Whatever year you came in, when you'd look at a UFC card and be like, title fight, banger fights, veteran coming back, good storyline here, this, here. Like, you had a lot of things. If you're not targeting some form of it to the full casuals, putting Jones Aspinall in a football stadium, doing that kind of things, like that's the thing that keeps your sport healthy and growing. And would you argue that under the Fertittas, it felt more like it was about pushing the sport, and under the Endeavor era, it's about what can we take from the sport?
So I have a few. Can I give you a few theories about what I think is happening? Because I think a lot of fans hear this and they're like, "Oh, these two old motherfuckers complaining," and I don't think that's necessarily unfair. But I do think there are some differences that we have to acknowledge. One is the Americans are just not as competitive as they once were. Like, the reality is, people might come to American gyms like ATT and AKA or Extreme Couture, but the American, like, if you go back, for example, when GSP fought Jake Shields, you might recall that week that was in Toronto. I went to that fight. That's when they had that round table, and it was Edgar, and it was Cruz, and it was Kane, and it was John Jones. And yeah, GSP was there, and Anderson Silva and Jose Aldo were there, but it was majority Americans. The reality is the Americans are just not as competitive as they once were. That's just a fact. Okay, that's the first problem. The second problem I think that we have to kind of face here is when we were indulging our MMA fandom coming up, it was a different kind of ecosystem, including a different media ecosystem, where, to your point, you had to really go through traditional channels of media to promote these guys. It meant car washes before fights. It meant car washes after fights. It meant managers calling up every different, write an article for me on this site and this one. And that has simply evaporated. There is still part of that happening. Obviously, people will go on Ariel's show today and stuff like that. And that's not nothing, of course. But it's not the same kind of all in on this process that really built up larger than life figures with these big, bold narratives and whatnot. And also, there's just so much happening from a content standpoint. It's just hard for rivalries to develop on top of it. I think a lot of that is playing into what you're talking about. That's making it feel very alien from the fight game that we grew up on and how we responded to it. But it is worth listening both to our audience as well as guys like Long Island Luke who are saying they don't exactly feel the same way that you do about this.
Okay, well, let me see if this finally encapsulates it. Whether you come into combat sports liking real combat sports from pro wrestling or not, the hook of a story, like from the very beginning, is there going to be a major audience for fights if you have no connection at all? Well, there's be people love violence, people love whatever. There's going to be some of it. But in totality, when you want something to be huge, you need the casuals. You need hooks, storylines to get the casuals. UFC used to be about the stories of the fighters and the fights. Now, the story that they tell is the success of their brand. That's all. That's the only story they tell anymore. Dana pushing through COVID. The Ultimate Fighter one fight saving the company after they put all that money in. Look at us today, where we stand politically. Like, it's all about telling the story of them and taking that eye off the ball and going completely corporate, commercial, microwave.
So there is also a TKO element here.
Has sucked the soul. The Endeavor TKO era has sucked the soul that keeps people caring. That's my point. My point isn't the hardcores that are going to be there every week no matter what because they love fighting or they're just into this. I'm talking about the casuals that are going to come and go.
What is the evidence that UFC has suffered from the casual fan retention?
I think I've never seen as many groups of people be like, I couldn't miss a fight on a pay-per-view, and now I don't even watch it live. You know what I'm saying? Like that's changed really quickly because post-COVID they were on fire.
Is that your experience, Long Island Luke? I think that's actually a really interesting discussion.
I was going to say I have friends who are, I'll call them casuals, who only really watch pay-per-views, and I know for a fact they did not buy the last 2 pay-per-views.
Even this one?
Yeah, they didn't think it was worth it. Again, that's them. They're
But it's fucking Poeton. I don't understand that.
Dude, I'm not the person. I'm just saying. That's what they do.
Okay, fair enough. I'm asking you to justify their logic. I
mean, is Dana, he was talking at the post-fight press conference about next year they may have to figure out lightening his load because he's got boxing, he's got power slap, he's got so much going on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole nother rabbit hole discussion about, replacing him and who could do that. But I'm just saying, like, do you like covering this sport and watching this sport as a fan in this Endeavor TKO era? Has it improved the product or has it only month by month, year by year, taken from it, taken the storylines, taken that care level? I never felt what I felt on Saturday where it was just sort of like, this doesn't matter. Yeah, I want to see the main event, but everything else felt like it didn't matter.
I'll say this. There is simply no denying that we have to account for the fact that the way in which we fell in love with the fight game doesn't exist for anybody anymore. And however young people interface with the fight game and how they come to it, it's going to be a different process. And we don't understand that, and we have to acknowledge that up front.
But
And I think,
it's married to the star issue, though.
okay, fair enough. But I'm also going to say this to the young people who might be watching, or people who had a different relationship to how they came to the fight game now, which is that you also must understand, not only is the UFC a monopoly, which we've been over a million times, but the parent company, TKO, they're Wall Streeting this whole, they're treating the UFC like a financial instrument as part of a broader financial portfolio, not to the same extent that PFL does their own organization, not even fucking close to that.
Imagine if PFL could use this opening to change their...
But what I mean is you can detect it. It is noticeable relative to how it used to be. And the point I want to make is, like, remember when Conor and fucking Jose Aldo went on a world tour to promote that fight? Like, the UFC, dude, that was when they were showing, like, when the UFC was like, you want to see how good we are at promoting fights? Watch this shit. And they did it. And they were right. And it worked. Like, what we want to see is not them flex their muscle about how big their market cap is.
Dude, live gate, that's all they care about.
Or their live gate. We want to
flex.
see them flex their muscle in terms of what they can do as promoters.
Yes.
Not measured so much by the financial measurables, but measured by that kind of buzz, that cultural cachet. And I'm sorry to the younger fans. I can admit that we're missing components of this because of the way they came to the sport is simply a different way, and I accept that. But they also must accept that kind of thing that they used to do.
Sure.
They just simply don't do anymore. And what we're trying to identify is, I think some of that is missing.
They're still the premier vehicle in MMA by far. I mean, PFL can't get their shit. PFL is about their own story. They're about telling you about their smart cage
they
tournaments.
Might be worse.
They never tell you about their fighters' stories. But I will say, though, that it doesn't feel like a premier product anymore. And I don't say that, oh, you're the boxing guy, you're just shitting, or you have a grudge against Dana. None of the above. I'm the guy that wants long-term job security here. You know what I mean? I want this thing to reach out to casuals. I want people to be banging on the door of UFC offices going, where's Jones Aspinall? We haven't heard. Put that in a stadium. Let's have a moment here. So that's really the argument. I mean, I'm watching this turn into some of the bad stretches in boxing in recent years. I'm feeling some of those same elements in this TKO era, and it does scare me to a certain degree.
Let me say one thing, if I may, last one on this. If there are viewers out there that really think we're missing something on this argument, and I'm sure that we are, hit us up, morningcombat@gmail.com, morningcombat@gmail.com.
Send a video in, we'll play it.
Send a video, send a response. Now listen, you can call us names, that's fine, but what we're actually looking for is like a really good argument to help us understand what we might be missing, because I'm certain, dude, generationally things happen where you have to be very careful about the myopia of your own worldview. morningcombat@gmail.com. You can send a voice note, you can send a video note, you can send a written note.
No private parts, though.
Yeah, don't send your dick and balls or butthole, but everything else is fair game. Let us know what you think we're wrong about, what BC's missing, what I'm missing maybe. I'd actually, and I couldn't say this more sincerely, we would love to hear it.